Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Global Health and AI discussion series, AI Demystified, Practical Insights and the Path to Success. My name is Natasha Sunderji. I am the Global Health and Nutrition Lead at Accenture Development Partnerships, and I also serve as a member of the board of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance. I am honored to be with you today to serve as your moderator for today's discussion. Now, for those of you who are new to the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, we are a membership organization and central network hub of more than 85 member organizations from across the sectors. We serve as a neutral convener, catalyst, and connector, brokering multi-sector collaborations and engaging the tech sector alongside traditional global health stakeholders. Our theory of change is based on the assumption that collaboration across sectors, expertise, and geographies is necessary to solve today's complex global health challenges and to advance global health equity. Now, more than a third of our members have a tech focus, which is why we really lean into advancing digital health and innovations. One of the ways in which we do this is by serving as the secretariat for the World Health Organization's Tech Task Force. Another is by hosting learning webinars like today's session to advance our collective knowledge on key technology topics like artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is one of the top issues of our time. Following our convening on AI in June, as well as our participation in the White House Roundtable on AI and health, our members requested more opportunities to share knowledge and to better understand AI's potential impact on global health. This kickoff event is the first in a quarterly series designed to increase knowledge and understanding of AI tools available to expand the impact of our collective global health programming in low and middle income countries. Today's session is going to start with the basics. What is AI? Why are we seeing such tremendous growth in AI-powered solutions? And what are some of the concrete solutions that our members are driving? You will hear from Pendulum, from Viamo, and from Path about some of the challenges they faced and how they overcame them. You'll also get a chance to hear from the brilliant Bill Weeks, Microsoft's Director of AI and Health, on what we're seeing in terms of interesting use cases of AI in the healthcare sector. Now, before we get started, a few housekeeping things. Please mute yourself. Feel free to communicate via the chat window. This is a Zoom meeting and not a webinar, so you can feel free to use the chat freely. Introduce yourself, post questions for our speakers, and we'll be monitoring the chat for questions and do our very best to answer as many of them as we can during our Q&A period. So without further ado, let's dive in. And let me ask the brilliant Bill Weeks, Director of AI for Health at Microsoft, to join me on camera to talk through AI in the global health landscape. A little bit about Bill. He is a medical doctor. He has a PhD in economics and an MBA. He conducts research to improve health, applying AI in 3 different areas: imaging, public health, and large language models. In addition to being Microsoft's Director of AI and Health, he's also the medical director for Bing, Microsoft's search engine. In his own words, Bill seeks to empower payers, providers, policymakers, pharmaceuticals, and pharmacies to improve the health value chain for the populations and patients that they serve. Welcome, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's totally my pleasure. I appreciate the use of the word brilliant, but I'm going to take that as more of a UK euphemism than the way that Americans kind of like good, pretty good is more, I think, accurate. But thanks so much for the introduction.
I'm sure people will feel otherwise after this conversation. But let's start with the topic of AI and its influence on global health. Most of our audience is seeing that AI is playing a transformative role in addressing global challenges. Where are you seeing the biggest potential for impacting global health in particular?
In global health, what I see the potential being is this opportunity to kind of massively expand a resource-constrained workforce in low resource settings. So if we think in the U.S., right? So AI can improve quality of care and care safety in developed countries like the U.S. or the EU, right? What it can also do, I think, is bring that higher level quality to lower resource settings and improve access to care. And the way I explain that is if you can, for instance, we're working with a group in Australia to be able to look at in Aboriginal kids' eardrums with an otoscope and then classify them as to whether they have a high probability of having problems, eardrum problems or not. And we're doing a similar thing in Mexico and Brazil with retinopathy of prematurity, looking at the retinas using just local health workers, not, I mean, barely trained people. Historically, what has happened is those kids would need to go to a scarce resource like an ENT in Australia or an ophthalmologist, a pediatric ophthalmologist in Mexico or Brazil, of which there are very, very few. So by kind of reducing the need for these providers, these scarce resources to do screening, you can essentially massively expand their workforce. They're specialists. They should be treating sick people, not spending 80% of their time screening normal people or people who don't have the particular medical problems. So to me, this kind of AI enhanced, partnered with humans and incorporated into the provider workflow is a tremendous opportunity to bring better healthcare and better use resources, particularly in low resource settings. Beyond that, just for kind of basic clinical care, beyond like specialty care, like I was talking about, I think that some of the algorithms and the information that would be available, it would be high quality information, could be made available to low resource settings so that many more people could have access to kind of basic healthcare needs and be again directed if needed to the proper provider.
I think that's a great example of how we might be able to tackle the healthcare workforce shortages that WHO has been calling out as a problem today, as well as a growing problem into the future. And the point you made around diagnostics is one of the themes that one of our presenters is going to pick up on now. So I appreciate you introducing it. Beyond making better use of our current workforce, AI has been talked about in a number of different use cases, from better supporting population health management to supporting preclinical care and R&D, to then driving better diagnostics, as you noted, as well as supporting back office functions. What are you seeing in terms of those use cases? Are there any interesting solutions that you've seen emerge in those spaces that are worthy to highlight?
Absolutely. And again, kind of more focusing on developed countries, but also I think as the lower resource settings begin to collect data. Right now, I mean, frankly, the challenge in working with a number of these countries is the data are not digitized and they're of poor quality. But Microsoft, for instance, owns Nuance, right? Nuance used to be, I think, Dragon, which is a dictation process. What Nuance has done is incorporated ambient AI into the provider office, right? So you have essentially a computer on the wall, and I can have a discussion with you. You can have several family members. If I, as your physician, we can discuss things. I can look at you in the eye and not be looking over here typing on my computer while you bleed to death next to me. We can talk, we can chat, we can get input from your family members. The ambient AI can capture all this, develop it into a SOAP note, a typical note that a physician would write in, make recommendations for certain kind of treatments, particularly if you needed a vaccination or some kind of a annual lab or something like that, and really facilitate the encounter considerably. I think EHRs have contributed a lot to physician burnout in these developed countries. It would be a shame if they continue to do that in the developing countries as they adopt EHRs. Let's have intelligence help do that. And let's have back office operations, as you pointed out, be kind of done automatically. So GPT is just a fabulous tool for creating a note that can be, for prior authorization or something like that, or for employer to say this person was sick and they need to, instead of the provider doing all that or having back office operations costs doing that, it can be just generated very, very quickly. And again, with the provider reviewing, but the review just takes seconds instead of minutes, and that adds up. So from those perspectives, kind of the back office stuff of scheduling and writing letters and ordering things, that can be really tremendously helped with AI. The clinician encounter bit can be tremendously helped and can be incorporated even on Teams or Zoom or what have you for tele stuff, which would be, again, a tremendous opportunity to kind of expand the workforce and expand access. And then, thinking about diagnostics, I think we already kind of touched on the opportunities to have some diagnostics with, as you point out, we do computer vision, so X-rays and looking at skin and doing, some help, physician assistance, I think, or provider assistance. So not a pure diagnostic thing, but hey, you should look here, and that's quite helpful. For instance, we work with Johns Hopkins, who are some of the best pancreatic radiologists in the world. And they have a great center, but you have to go to Baltimore to get that excellence, right? So we've worked with them to create some algorithms that can help a radiologist in Oklahoma City, where I grew up, which is not necessarily, a medical mecca, to identify an area that said, hey, maybe you should look here again, because pancreatic cancer is pretty rare. Most radiologists aren't going to see a lot of it, and it's usually caught incidentally because they don't do a regular screening. So if you just get you have a belly problem, you get an abdominal scan, maybe there might be something that shows up. So a lot of cases could get missed with having kind of being able to export the expertise from Johns Hopkins to Oklahoma City or the world. Could be tremendously helpful in kind of identifying stuff that might otherwise be missed. So that's kind of in a diagnostic form. I think there's also tremendous opportunity with voice. The Nuance product I was talking about, captures voice. But one thing as a psychiatrist is that word choice and hesitancy of word choice and speed with which you talk, all can be kind of precursors and identify mental health problems, right? It's very hard as a psychiatrist or an internist who might see a patient once a year to remember what they sounded like last year and capture this. With AI capturing this, I can use myself as a baseline with every visit. And so the AI might be able to pick up early signals for Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or depression or mania or anxiety that would, again, allow a provider to kind of dig deeper and say, maybe we should ask some questions about your depression now, because the words you're choosing are darker and are kind of the speed is slower than what you normally use when you speak. So those kind of opportunities, I think, for all sorts of diagnostics are tremendously good. And then follow up and the potential for incorporation of AI into peripherals and wearables. And even I think the true future is going to be the just ambient, sensing, frankly, particularly for people who live at home or and are older. The challenge with engaging people and even the watches is kind of the gem effect that we all have in January when everyone's there, and then February no one's there anymore because we were all excited that we quit. And people will even do this with their watches. They'll quit charging their watch. If you give them a free watch, they'll quit using it partially because maybe they aren't losing weight as quickly as they thought, and they don't like to hear that kind of or understand that. So I think to be able to monitor health progress, and now there's stuff at Microsoft. We have a product that can look at your face, use your camera and look at your face and see if you are stressed. If you have to allow this, and there's permissions and stuff like that, but to see if you're stressed, and it can then tell you, hey, maybe you should take a bit of a break right now in your workplace, right? So there's these ambient technologies that might be very helpful in kind of managing stress, managing chronic disease, and continuing to push, kind of have people nudge people toward healthier behaviors. I think getting kind of the reminding right is going to be critical. If people are over-reminded, they just shut it off, and there's kind of alarm fatigue, if you will. If they're under-reminded, they quit doing stuff, or they just turn it off. So you have to get it right. You have to understand over time, and I think AI will help us understand this. Over a lifespan, what people are interested in from a health perspective changes a fair amount. If you're having a baby, you're suddenly interested in health, and it's a really good time to quit smoking and drinking, right? And maybe that kind of lasts. If you had an acute event, you suddenly get pretty interested in health. One of the challenges, I think, is that the people who are really engaged in the technology tend to be incredibly fit people, right? Who are trying to get their mile down, to close to 4-minute miles, and is not the rest of us. So how we engage the rest of that population for population kind of health management and nudging in the right direction, it would be kind of critical. It would rely on these more ambient technologies, I think.
So you already started to raise a number of really important challenges that I hope we can continue to unpack as we chat with our various presenters over the course of today, from the challenges when it comes to data quality to the fact that people have different levels of engagement around their health, and that changes over time. And sometimes AI technology isn't able to keep pace unless it is ambient. You even highlighted how in many cases, the people who are designing the solutions themselves look potentially different than the population they are trying to serve. And it's that last point that I really want to pick up on, because so many people in our audience are focused on working in partnership with communities and individuals that live in low and middle income countries. And in regions with limited resources, how can we make sure that the global health community is ensuring that these AI technologies that are being developed are appropriate, are accessible, and inclusive, so that they're really helping to support improved health outcomes for underserved populations?
Yeah, I think the key thing there is to have the local people be integral to and even driving the effort, right? I think there's a real challenge in thinking, and I just had this discussion with someone yesterday, in thinking that a single AI product would be lasting in any way. So an AI product you might have now to help manage the population will be a very different product in 10 years for a couple of reasons. First, off-the-shelf stuff has been trained on a particular population. And it may not be applicable, right? Stuff that we do in the US is not going to be applicable in low and middle income countries, right? It's just not. So we have to train models and collect data and understand what those needs are, what they want to do with the AI, and then how it might be used most effectively for them and for their public health kind of goals. So that's kind of critical. I mean, to be fair, I think sometimes we beat up a little bit on AI because it's imperfect, and the reality of the world is that most medical research has been done on people who look a lot like me, and not so much like some other people, right? But it gets applied because that's what the research has been done. It may not be effective in these other populations, and similarly, physicians in the U.S., right? Medical mistakes kill 100,000 people a year, right? Physicians in the current practice of state-of-the-art practice is very imperfect. So I think when we think about the AI models and their application, we need to respectfully say that it's a very imperfect world now. We do need to have guardrails, and we do need to incorporate people. We need to do that in the US as well. But in low and middle income countries, we need to definitively have the ministries of health involved and have the local communities involved, so that the AI is meeting their needs and not just the needs of some company like Microsoft, who might be just kind of promoting product.
So you talked about this point around guardrails. What are those guardrails that are needed to help ensure that we are developing appropriate solutions and not introducing undue harm? Are there specific ethical frameworks or guidelines that exist today that we should be prioritizing when we're developing and implementing AI solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. And Microsoft, for instance, has had a responsible AI group going for 20 years. I mean, I think AI, everyone thinks of AI now because a year and a half GPT was introduced, and it went to, 100 million people in a month or something like that. So, but AI has been existing for quite some time, right? It was introduced at Dartmouth in 1956 as a concept. So it's been around for quite some time. And we all infiltrate our whole life. Every time you go to Amazon or Netflix, you're using AI, right? So its application in healthcare, though, is critically important because it can cause a lot of damage if it's misused. So yes, there are guardrails. We need to have ethical and responsible AI. I think one of the key things we need to do is to monitor kind of a post-marketing surveillance. So if you have a drug come from the FDA, right, and it's Wegovy or something like that, it's been proven out, yeah, this is effective at weight loss or whatever, but we need to actually monitor at the population level whether that works. We need to do the same thing with AI, whether is it really kind of accomplishing these goals. I mean, my fear is that sometimes the funding kind of runs out and the interest runs out and is implemented because, like I said earlier, things will change. You expect, right? If AI is working, you would expect the population needs to change over some time period, right? Because you will have addressed kind of the key motivating factors for the initial AI effort, and those are being remedied, so it's getting better. And so in a few years, you might have a different one. So it will have to be iterated. It will have to be monitored, the effectiveness of it and the costs of it will have to be monitored over time to make sure that it continues to be kind of a cost-effective thing. So to me, that's kind of the key thing that's maybe missing. Everyone's got all sorts of responsible AI rules and and testing and stuff like that. I think that where the rubber hits the road is to see if it really works, and to the extent whether it works, and to be able to shut it down if it quits working pretty immediately.
Fair enough. So you talked about how things will change. And with that, I'd like to ask my last question as we've quickly run out of time, and it's looking to the future. What are some of those emerging trends or innovative applications of AI that you anticipate will shape the future of global health, specifically in low and middle income countries?
So I think actually large language models will do that considerably. I mean, even now you can take a film, an X-ray, and have a large language model interpret it without the need of a radiologist. So again, in low resource settings, maybe you don't need as many radiologists. You need them to review it, but you don't need them to read it. I was at a conference, I think a neurology conference about a year ago, and they were talking about their plans for a sub-Saharan African country of developing a neurology workforce, right? And this required having more medical schools and doing more training, and then having residency programs. And I raised my hand. I said, okay, this is great. What are you going to do for the next 30 years, though, until that workforce is in place, right? I think large language models can help do that considerably. They can help. I see a real future in kind of just in patient decision support, in so-called shared decision making, where we will be able to ask in the not too distant future, I think, for a patient like me with my characteristics, 60-year-old white male with a knee pain of X and a functionality impact of X, is getting a knee surgery a reasonable thing, or should I do medical management? And to anticipate then and show me the differences in pain levels and functionality over the next 10 years modeled out. And I think large language models will be able to do that very soon. So bringing that kind of technology to the rest of the world at a fairly inexpensive cost. I mean, right now you can do a lot. I've tested on Bing, obviously, as a medical director, but you can do it with Bard and Google as well. You get very, very good answers on, for free, essentially, from these sources, and to the degree, and we know that there's resource constraint, but we also know that there's a lot of phone use and smartphone availability and connectedness, frankly, in a lot of Africa. So I think that brings the population a kind of pretty good information. It's certainly better than what they have now. Probably every bit as good, if not better, than what's available in the U.S. Or developed countries from physicians for free, without to kind of make a decision about whether I should go on further and whether I need to be directed to additional care.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Bill, so much for sharing your perspectives. I really appreciate the fact that you brought a mix of both high-income country perspectives as well as low and middle-income country perspectives, because like so many technologies, they get developed and cultivated and trained on models that exist in high-income countries. So it's important that we spend some time understanding that as we think about bringing them to low and middle-income countries. Um, at this point in time, I would like to invite the first of our presenters, Brittany Hume-Charm, to join me. Brittany is the head of growth and global health at Pendulum, formerly known as Macro Eyes. Now, as many of you know, and as Bill alluded to, AI relies on very large data sets to develop its functionality. And as you also heard from Bill, in many of the low and middle income countries where we operate, data is incomplete, and in many cases, it can be inaccurate. Now, Brittany is going to shed light on how Pendulum is working with imperfect real-world global health data sets to develop predictions and recommendations that are advancing global health impact. Thank you, Brittany. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natasha, and thank you to the Alliance for having me. Could we just bring up my slides, please? Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here to introduce you to Pendulum and how we apply cutting-edge AI and machine learning to global health to increase access and outcomes and reduce waste. Just as a sense of where I'm going to be going in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to spend a few minutes first introducing Pendulum and the primary AI and machine learning solutions that we deploy in global health. And then I'll dive into how we address one of the common challenges that we see when working in this industry, which is data quality. All right, next slide, please. So we all know that resources of all kinds, whether that's health products, money, health workers, or time, are scarce. But too often the resources that we do have can't meet their maximum potential either because they aren't allocated optimally. So one very vivid example of this that we all saw, although there are many in global health, is that during COVID, there were over 1 billion vaccines that went unused in the first year of the pandemic, while others were scrambling to get them. Obviously, there are many drivers of this, but this is just one example of the kinds of waste that we accept in global health. And waste like this and the logistics that are used to carry them all the way to the last mile are terrible for the environment, creating 70% of the carbon emissions for the health sector. But we also don't know where to put our people and their time. We have a massive shortage of health workers, 18 million at a global level, yet the health workers that we do have are often spending their limited time targeting the wrong patients. So HIV research shows that nearly 80% of the patients who were ultimately lost to follow-up fell through the cracks of health systems' basic patient risk segmentations, hindering health outcomes and transmission control. So how can we make smarter decisions about how to deploy our people, our time, and our supplies for maximum effect? Next slide, please. Pendulum is a technology company that uses AI and machine learning to help leaders who are managing resources across networks make the best decisions possible. Our tools act as a performance-boosting layer on top of existing systems, taking data that already exists within our customer systems and the public domain and putting it to use in new ways. We're not just providing data in terms of information and insight, but as foresight, predicting what demand the system is likely to experience across every point in the network, and decision support, recommending how to allocate resources optimally to better meet that demand. The result is that resources are accessible where they need to be, every unit of product or time is used well, improving system performance, and fewer resources are misallocated or wasted. Next slide, please. Our team brings world-class AI and machine learning expertise to our work. Our co-founder, Subrit Sra, is one of the world's leading experts in machine learning optimization from MIT. And he, as Bill was saying, AI has been around for a long time. Macro Eyes, then, now Pendulum, was co-founded by Subrit more than a decade ago as a way to apply his research to real global operations problems. So for the last 10 years, we've been working on these challenges. And today we have a global team of AI experts, machine learning scientists, and data analysts across Africa, Europe, and North America. We serve multiple sectors, including healthcare, retail, and fast-moving consumer goods and other government services. But in 2018, we turned our eye to global health as we were the first AI investment by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they asked us to try to apply some of the tools that we saw we were using in the US health sector to global health, recognizing that the data wasn't always perfect, but was growing. It was a growing data pool. And over the years, we've developed a core capability in processing and making such data sets be usable for machine learning, which we'll talk about today. Today, our work in global health has expanded to include many of the largest funders and agencies. Last year, we worked in 13 countries, most of which were LMICs. Next slide. So in global health, we focus on delivering two main solutions. The first is our core offering, which is supply chain optimization. Pendulum's AI-driven forecasting solution, which we call Predict Products, uses AI to combine and learn from substantially more data than traditional forecasting methods, like a 3-month rolling average, and forecast an average of 39% better in global health contexts. With those clearer forecasts in hand, our intelligent resource planning solution, which we call Plan Products, can then use machine learning and optimization models to precisely allocate supply based on our customers' priorities and risk appetite. So are you trying to optimize for access? Are you trying to optimize to minimize waste? Or perhaps equity across all different kinds of facilities? Together, Predict and Plan can enable fewer stockouts, less waste, and more patients getting the diagnostics and treatment they need. Our other main solution takes the same approach, but instead of relying on product data, it looks at people data, processing electronic medical records to understand a given patient's history of encounters with the health system, and using that to predict their risk of missing a specific upcoming appointment or treatment. Pendulum generates patient risk scores for each patient and encounter, enabling health workers to segment clients more effectively and target resources like their scarce time to have maximum impact on adherence across the group. Existing approaches often prioritize patients by a single risk factor like infants or clients with high viral loads. Our models incorporate these, but also far less visible or obvious risk factors, delivering a shorter list that's twice as right. Next slide. So both of these tools rest on the same basic approach. This can be skewered in this meeting, but I call this slide AI 101 because I need some sort of a visual to break down the black box. But I know it's busy, so bear with me. Basically, we work with our clients to identify, access, and build pipelines to their internal and third-party data sets that could have relevant information to the problem at hand. We then combine those data sets and enable them to speak to one another, even if they're in wildly different formats, like time series data, GPS coordinates, and satellite imagery. We then train our proprietary models, like the ones that I just described, Predict, Plan, and Predict People, and they generate predictions and recommendations for future periods. These are then integrated back into our client systems and processes in a way that is putting those predictions and recommendations in front of them in a way that minimizes friction and maximizes their likelihood of actually using those recommendations. And then over time, the models will continue to learn and improve. Next slide. But what do you do when the data isn't perfect? That is to say, when you're deploying AI in the real world, and particularly the real world of global health. So machine learning is a combination of the quality of the data and the quality of the models. And we at Pendulum have developed a data-centric approach that spends extra effort to strengthen the data foundation of our models so that they can have maximum accuracy. So we start by understanding the data. We don't just take the data at face value. We collaborate and consult with our partners to understand the reality of their data capture process, including the context and the challenges. And then as we go through the process of data discovery, we ask questions to them and avoid making assumptions, which can lead to bias. Second, we supplement the data. This starts by broadening the aperture of where to look for signal. So our multivariate approach looks across not just a single product's recent consumption at one health facility, but it looks at patterns and relationships across all products of that facility, across all facilities, and in all available historical data. We then combine that with other data sets like secondary customer data that may be internally siloed and not speaking to one another, and third-party data that could contain demand and supply signals. And we evaluate those data sets for predictive signal. And then finally, we take the data that we're receiving and all of the information that we understand about how it was gathered, and we improve that data set. So we actually can be using our data analytics to be cleaning and correcting the data, understanding what some of those contexts were, but then also applying AI to be actually predicting what's going on in those data sets. So not just what's literally there, but actually how do we predict what some of the missing values might be, and use feature engineering to extract more value and insight from the data that exists. And then those go into our models. So I'll tell you a quick story about one of our global health deployments just to bring this to life. Next slide. So for the last 3 years, Pendulum has been applying our AI solutions to strengthen facility level forecasting of family planning products in Côte d'Ivoire. This partnership started when USAID and the Côte d'Ivoire Ministry of Health wanted, when they held an intelligent forecasting competition with sample data. They wanted to try to increase access to family planning commodities at points of care across the country, including more reliable on-shelf availability and without requiring additional commodities and budget. They wanted to understand how technology could help them do that. Facilities forecasts were often highly inaccurate, and facilities would receive far too few or far too many commodities than what they needed. So they knew they could do a better job. So they had this forecasting competition. They gave us some sample data. We won. And the country then invited us to come show what our models could do in the real world context. So accessing the real data where it existed, developing and deploying our models, and then establishing integration so that we could access the latest data live and be able to push our results into their system. Next slide. So what did we do? We ended up accessing 3 different data sets across more than 2,500 facilities across the country for 11 family planning products that was in their portfolio. And we looked at 6 years of data, which is the full data set available. And that gave us more than 28,000 time series. There were definitely challenges when it came to these data sets. This was a hard one. What we saw was that these 3 data sets were saying wildly different things. There were large discrepancies. They had different amounts of data in them because those 3 data systems had been put in place at different times, and they were used in different ways. We found that one of the data sets, for example, was really just being adopted and had hardly any data at all in it. And then where we looked at the other 2, we found that 93% of the times that they both had consumption data in them, those consumption data points disagreed with one another. Got it. And then we also saw that there were some times when volume seemed to go to 0 across different products. It turns out that was actually because there were products were being recategorized or relabeled. And so how do we understand some of that detail? But really, the most challenging thing is just 80% of the values were missing. And this is not unusual. So we applied those 3 steps of our solution to be really understanding the context of the data, to then be selectively supplementing the data with different data sets. We actually ended up deciding to set aside 2 of those data sets and look at what are the pieces of the data that are most predictive, and use those, and then be applying advanced imputation and feature engineering to be getting a better sense or nowcasting of what the data is actually saying. Ultimately, we ended up showing that we could take data sets that had 80% of the values missing and come up with forecasts that were 38% more accurate than the 3-month rolling average. Next slide. So, where does this go now? So, with the results of that kind of forecasting in place, the government and USAID said, yes, please deploy these forecasts. We believe that these are better. And we have integrated them into the ordering system that health facilities are using. So that's inside MSupply, actually into the same workflow in UI. and that informs their orders each month. They also asked us to do the same thing for malaria, to look at that data. What we found was we had a 37% improvement as we look at malaria products across the system. So this year and moving forward, we're going to be scaling our family planning forecast to all health facilities that are on the MSupply platform. That's almost 1,000 at this point. And also the government has asked us to, please can you sort of switch from forecasting to decision support, help us understand what to be actually sending and issuing to each level of the health facility of the system to be making sure that the products are in the right place. And then finally, we're going to be also deploying our malaria forecasts so that they can have the same impact as the family planning ones. So I will leave you, last slide, with one question, which is, how can AI machine learning help global health do more with less? That is what we really believe at Pendulum, that we all have a calling that we must be trying to do more with less. And we believe that AI can help us do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I was incredibly surprised to hear that you were able to create such incredible predictive models when you had such large gaps in your data set. If 80% of the values are missing, one would have initially assumed that you wouldn't be able to do that. And so hopefully when we get into the Q&A period, we can dig into that a little bit deeper. But at this point in time, I'd like to invite our next speakers to join us from VIAMO. Shulakshana Gupta, VP of East and Southern Africa, and Priscilla Obeng, Senior Program Manager of Special Programs at VIAMO. Now, just under half of the population in low and middle income countries have access to basic internet connectivity. So with all this talk about AI, we have to ask ourselves, is it even possible to bring AI solutions and generative AI solutions to communities that don't have the internet? The VIAMO team is here to tell us exactly that. So over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Shulakshana Gupta, and I'm VIAMO's Vice President for Partnerships for East and Southern Africa. Speaking to you from Lusaka, the capital of Zambia. VIAMO, we are a platform company. And before I get into generative AI, I want to give you a quick overview of how our platform works. Now, I just want to, put out a little disclaimer here. We are not health experts. We're technology experts, and we work with health organizations like the audience in this room to deliver global health solutions. So at VIAMO, we think of ourselves as the Google for the billions that still have just a basic mobile phone. Remember those old Nokia 3310s that you could smash against a wall and it would still work? Well, I tried to cut one out on a piece of paper, which probably looks silly, but my colleague Stephen here can show you one that he actually has. And while I might have an iPhone, there are over 3 billion users that can't use Google because they don't have a device that can get online. So for those billions, we created the VIAMO platform that users can access on just a very simple mobile phone in the same way that we use Google. They can access information, advisory, get linked to services. And last year, we worked with over 700 clients, including many organizations in this room, PSI, WHO, UNICEF, BOTH, just to name a few. And here is OC, VIAMO's archetypical user, for whom this blue triangle represents a gateway in the same way that a web browser is our gateway online. And this blue triangle is how we think of the VIAMO platform as a meeting place where OZ and our partners can meet. And we help our partners create spaces on our platform, just like they can create spaces on the web or on a smartphone app. These spaces can include information, surveys, symptom checkers, and links to beneficial health products and services. And the way that our archetype OZ accesses this platform is by picking up that very basic phone, dialing a national free number, and following a series of listen and choose steps in her local language to get to the pre-recorded information that she wants. You'll see here that in 2023, we had 24 million users. And you can see how many calls these users made to our platform and how many messages they listened to. So this version of the Viamo platform, where OZ clicks and chooses from pre-recorded audio information, is what we call version 1. But last year here in Zambia, we did something amazing. With OpenAI launching ChatGPT, we essentially leapfrogged OZ from this user experience where she was silent and listening to our latest version where generative AI has empowered her for the very first time to ask a question in her own voice. So we launched this AI-powered Ask Viamo Anything pilot in May 2023. And it's still live. Users can call in without using any data or an internet connection simply by dialing a 3-digit short code 667 on their phones. They can ask a question in their own voice and then receive a detailed answer generated by AI. Can you believe we've answered 70,000 questions to date? And what we're finding even more interesting is that about half of our engaged users are women and that they're really young, between the ages of 18 to 24, and they come from all over the country, as you can see on the slide. Within about a month of launching this pilot, we saw and continue to see huge increases in engagement among our users, as you can see from this data. Now, some of you might know that there is an ongoing cholera epidemic in Zambia, and we're seeing search behavior on our platform that is similar to search behavior for cholera information on Google. And this is a really big deal for us because our users have never been able to search in this way before. Before I hand you over to my colleague Priscilla, I want to play you a video of some of our users in Zambia engaging with this Ask Viamo Anything feature.
Welcome back to the 667 service. To try out the 667 Ask Me Anything feature, press 1. You can ask me anything and I will do my best to answer. What would you like to ask?
What drugs can somebody take to treat malaria?
How does one deal with severe depression?
Where can we buy tomato fertilizer in Zambia?
So how can I start up a business in Zambia?
Where can I get a small business loan in Zambia?
What is climate change?
Thank you for your question. Please wait for a minute while I find an answer for you. The most ideal time to grow tomatoes is during the cooler months of the year, which occurs between May and August. Here are some institutions that can offer small business loans. 1. Standard Bank. They offer business loans and their requirements include having a registered business. 2. Pro-credit banks. They specialize in small and mid-sized enterprises. Several stores around Zambia stock agricultural inputs like fertilizer. Some of these include Agritech Expo Zambia in Chisamba, Input Zambia Limited in Lusaka, and Nitrogen Chemicals of Zambia in Kafue. Setting up a business in Zambia involves several steps. Here are the first 3 key steps. 1. Registration, which includes registering a business name with the Patents and Companies Registration Agency, PACRA, and obtaining your unique identification number.
Use this in your day-to-day work?
Yes, I would, because it's easier than typing. You just get to ask.
Okay, I would use it to research on things I'm not clear about. Yes, things that I would need more details about.
Okay.
For me to be able to help me to achieve my goals. Okay, it's easy and quick. I can use it to research.
It would help me, since no data is recommended, so I'm able to access information without the internet, which is good.
This in your day-to-day at work?
Yeah, I think yes, totally yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Lakshana. Hi, everyone. My name is Priscilla Obeng. I'm a senior program manager with Viamo, and I'm speaking from Accra, Ghana. So I would conclude by sharing some of the key learnings that we've had from our experiments in Zambia. Now, what we have observed is that there is a need for us to contextualize how we present AI in, low resource, like with the users that we work with. And we have noticed that, so when a question is asked, for example, the typical AI response could be a little bit generic, as we can see in Colombia. And Fiamo has taken a step further to localize the responses that GPT or voice companion shares back with our end users. So, for example, we are looking at how we provide information that are more actionable. Of course, we also work with the mental sectors and interested in the type of impacts that we have on OZ. For us, this be the best way to go ahead and also be able to track impacts of the service in such markets. Next slide. Yeah. Then also, as my colleague had presented in the previous demographic data, we have noticed that there is surprisingly a higher preference from females or women. We have noticed that they are the ones that have highest engagement in terms of the number of questions that are asked, the number of calls that have been placed, even the average questions that are asked on a call. If you are quite familiar with how mobile technology works in such communities, you would know that this would have some statistical significance. We also believe that if this trend continues, then we might not only be looking at making such technology available to users, but also making sure that we are contributing to bridging the gender digital divide, which seems to be prevalent in such communities. Yeah, next slide. So this was the biggest learnings from our experiments, the need for us to improve or develop language technology so that we can also leverage on existing tools available. So currently, Viamo has, for our platform, we have over 60 languages that are available across different countries, over 22 countries. And what we have noticed is that this table that you're seeing, where we have highlighted in green cells, these are the languages that are easily and readily available to integrate with existing tools for language tag. Now, what this means is that we have users, millions of users who might never get the chance to also experience or benefit from our voice companion. So if we take a language like Hausa, which is quite popular in Western Africa, Viamo at the moment has over 3 million active listeners who are always engaging with our platform, listening to key information to improve their lives, but they might never be able to access to such technologies because of the language limitation. Here, we want to call upon big techs like Google, like Microsoft, and also like Meta, develop into the languages that we have available. This way, we can make AI not just equitable in some of these low resource sense communities, but also we can also make it accessible as well. Yeah, and I would also like to invite you to reach out to us and also as we want this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lakshana and Priscilla. Incredible to see what you've been able to do with basic phones and how you've been able to provide information to individuals who otherwise might not have been able to access that information. We're already seeing some questions in the chat window. Thank you to Brittany for already starting to respond to the ones that are coming for Pendulum. Lakshana, Priscilla, feel free to use the chat window to start responding to some of the questions that have come in for Viamo specifically. But at this point in time, I'd like to invite our final presenter to join me, Helen Story, public health scientist at PATH. Now, One of the things that Bill spoke about in depth as he was describing the key use cases in global health is the critical role that AI can play in driving more accurate diagnosis. And while diagnostics are critical tools for guiding clinical decision making, we know that access to the right data is a critical challenge in developing quality and accessible tools for all populations. Helen is here to shed light on the need for open access data to de-risk R&D for health technologies. Thank you for joining us, Helen. Over to you.
Thanks for having me. I think I'm a little bit lucky to be the last, and hopefully I can weave together some of the themes that have already been mentioned. And I have to say that these types of conversations are probably one of my favorite parts of my job, as AI is such an exciting opportunity in health, and particularly in reaching more people everywhere. So next slide. I think the importance of diagnostics has been stated already, but really just want to reiterate that the lack of diagnosis represents a large gap in patient care, with 47% of the population lacking access to appropriate diagnostics, and that looking about close to 80% in low and middle income country settings. Next slide. And as others have noted, that in primary care settings, access to objective health information is critical to guide scarce resources to where they are needed most. Basic medical devices like pulse oximeters or hemoglobinometers are often missing where they are needed, and these tools are critical for giving providers information on how to address patient needs and provide care and treatment plans. And while these devices it may exist in other settings, there are not as many options that perform well potentially on children versus adults and are adapted to low resource settings. And one of the reasons for this is that access to the right reagents or data to build and validate these tools is harder to access when it's hard to reach populations like children or vulnerable populations. And it's not feasible for many manufacturers to do this type of work, especially when those manufacturers are located in global north settings. And this type of research is really costly. So smaller companies or smaller startups may not prioritize markets or patient populations that we care about because of hard to access barriers. So as part of a recent project called the Tools for Integrated Management of Childhood Illnesses, or TIMC for short, one of the focuses that we've been working on is advancing the market for multimodal pulse oximeters, which are adding functionality measurements on top of the traditional blood oxygen saturation. And I'll speak more about this project throughout, so just introducing it here. Next slide. So from our work with traditional diagnostics, we know that one of the early needs for new R&D of diagnostics is access to quality reagents to develop and validate new tests. And biobanks and specimen repositories are not new, and this has been an important resource to accelerate early R&D and research for important diseases, particularly maybe more rare diseases or diseases of epidemic potential. And when we landscaped multimodal devices, or next generation pulse oximeters over the last 4 years, we're seeing this evolution in medical devices that are adding connectivity and adding smartphone based functionality and adding AI enabled functionality. So where we used to think of standalone medical devices to measure, as diagnostics or to measure health conditions, we're now seeing devices that might connect to a tablet or might connect to a smartphone for primary functionality, as well as we're seeing medical or health tools that are being developed entirely on a smartphone platform without any additional hardware requirements. And this is changing how we're thinking about health biospecimens and reagents as health information is really expanding. And so next slide, please. I think as we talk about AI tools, it's no different than biospecimens, but now it's data that is really required for that early R&D and that early validation of new technologies. And I'll just give one example. I think the term multimodal is something we hear a lot in thinking about, health information, health data beyond just blood specimens, but also health sensing, also environmental or ambient sort of variables that are all adding information that we can use in order to understand what's going on. And one just very specific example is something called photoplasmography, which is the technique that underlines pulse oximeters. It's a measurement of the circulatory system that's non-invasively determined through light reflection and absorption. And in 1 second of a PPG waveform, you might have up to 100 data points, depending on the number of sensors and the number of light filters that are put on top of that. So in children, anemia and pregnant women as well, anemia is an important health outcome, and detection is sort of that first step in thinking about how do we intervene in anemic children. And so we see innovation in high-income markets is rapidly advancing with these tools, and specifically in the wellness space. So you can see on the right are several different ways that PPG can be measured. One is through a standard pulse oximeter probe. One is through the sensors on your smartwatch. Another is actually through the camera on your smartphone directly when you place your finger over it. And then another is actually, it's called remote PPG imaging. It's using the camera forward facing and looking at your face or other parts of your body to determine PPG. So all of this is very interesting and complex, but just to say, like, this area of research is exploding, and it's really thinking about health and wellness products. But at the same time, we know that these tools are needed and not existing in primary care settings and low resource environments. And so how can we sort of bring more of those tools and technologies and focus on the populations that we care about, and potentially enabling data sharing to drive innovation for these needed health technologies. Next slide, please. So through the TIMSI project, we are looking at building a data repository to advance early R&D and enable innovation predominantly focused on children, but also for use in low resource settings. Primary health care is critically important, and some of these basic vital sign measurements are not available. This is an interesting perspective that brings together sort of how we're thinking about data and data safety, data privacy, and ethical and responsible use of AI. And so as we're building this tool, our main focus is to make available at no cost data that would enable AI developers to build or validate models that measure basic health measurements for the populations we care about. And this really builds on work that we did during COVID-19. Seattle was one of the first areas where patients were presenting with disease, and it offered an opportunity to create a biospecimen repository from those samples, just clinical discard samples in the area, which we then were able to make available for developers to accelerate devices and technologies for low resource settings. So similar to this, building on our experience around biorepositories, we are working to set up data repositories as well. And things that we really are focusing on are how do we ensure sharing with global partners, and some of this data is very large sized, and that creates a new challenge for thinking about, I'm not shipping blood samples anymore, and now I'm thinking about sharing large data files and storing them. Data privacy and security standards and sovereignty, which varies across countries. And then thinking about expandable and transferable. So really, this is a resource that can continue to serve many different users depending on their needs, and is not, something that will run out when the specimens sort of, we expire or we run out of. So some of the key principles and requirements that we're sort of building with, we're learning from what we've done and what we've seen in biospecimen repositories. Next slide, please. And I think, really critical is thinking about responsible and ethical use of data. And as Bill mentioned, this is not new to the tech world, and many, industry leaders have been thinking about responsible use of AI for a very long time. And this is, central to the work that we're doing and that others are doing. So including ethical reviews, including national stakeholder engagement, legal and scientific governance plans, and community-driven insights is all shaping how we are addressing this this type of work. This also builds, I think, importantly on work that Digital Square and others have done around global goods or digital public goods, and thinking about what are some AI building blocks that allow everyone to move faster. What are some, basic resources that allow access to the type of technology development that we are hoping to see advanced in this space. And so I don't think, neither of these things are new, but really kind of trying to piece together like all of the different elements that allow this AI ecosystem to thrive. And then I think next slide. Yeah, and so just to sort of highlight, Path is not the only group in this space, and we are absolutely working in a partnership with a number of different groups. UCSF Open Oximetry is a project that we are connected with through the TIMC work and thinking about pulse oximeters and potential bias due to variations in skin pigmentation, and making that data available to manufacturers so that we can ensure that tools work as expected on all communities. Through the Washington COVID-19 biorepositories, we saw 63 submissions that ultimately supported 5 FDA EUA and 1 WHO EUL regulatory submission. So products that are actually making it to the market. Another project that we have worked on, and we worked on this actually with Microsoft AI, and it's looking at the development of universal RDT readers. And so having access to images for COVID-19 and HIV RDTs has been an element that has allowed more research and thinking about, are there ways to accelerate universal RDT readers. And so then the latest data repository that I'm speaking about is with the PPG waveform. This is just one study that we're putting into this database that we hope to connect with additional work that's happening all over with research groups and local partners, in order to say, how do we encourage AI developers and others to sort of work on this space that we know is underserved and could be better accelerated with partnerships and broad collaborations. So I'll stop there. I think I was a little bit faster and happy to answer questions, but really I love hearing this conversation.
Thank you so much, Helen. You're right on time. You're right. We're ready to move into some of the questions. If people can continue to add their questions into the chat window, that would be great. And thank you to the Pendulum and to the Viamo team for already starting to address some of them in the chat window. Helen, the first question I had was for you, and that's in relation to the point you brought up around Digital Square. You specifically mentioned that Digital Square has spent a lot of time already thinking about digital public goods and some of the AI building blocks that can allow everyone to move faster. Can you spend a couple minutes talking about what some of those building blocks are, what some of those tools that exist are, so people can continue to look into them?
Yeah, so I'll give you a very high level and then encourage everyone to sort of dig in and learn more. But digital public goods and global goods are sort of two different ideas around how to make digital resources more accessible to everyone. And I think one of them is a UN-based sort of opportunity that's been moving forward, and then Digital Square is another opportunity around the global goods. But the idea is that, how do we accelerate innovation for all players in this space, and not just a select few who might have access to certain capabilities or resources? And I think data sets is something that digital public goods sort of thinks about. So software and products and services, data sets and AI building blocks, I think, are another area that we could sort of start to expand into this. And I think one example that I'll put out there is the recent work that Google did with their AI toolkit. And so, they made available certain code and certain resources that would allow other healthcare developers to accelerate some of their app development with meeting some of the FHIR standards or some of the critical requirements that we would like to see across all healthcare technologies. And so some of those, opportunities to expand what everyone is doing with some of those common resources is something that's really exciting, and I think an area that path is particularly focused on.
Fantastic. And a thank you to those that have put questions into the chat window, Takwa, Ume, Taija, as well as Andrew. Hopefully the responses that you've seen in the chat window have helped you to learn a little bit more about some of the areas that you've noted. The next question comes to us from our board chair, actually, Colin, to Brittany. How did the stakeholders in Côte d'Ivoire's health system respond to the process and predictive data that you provided? What approaches or outcomes were helpful in winning them over?
So I'm just going to repeat this back. So how did the stakeholders respond to the approaches that we took? What we were really able
data that you shared back with them, because a lot of what you talked about with how your goal was to provide data back to the decision makers so that they could make better choices around where they allocate resources.
Yeah, got it. So, the stakeholders in the first stage of our implementation in Côte d'Ivoire have really been the last mile health facilities, right? They're the ones we're at this stage focusing on how do you improve the forecast to those last mile health facilities so that they can be improving their orders and acting on those. What's been so fascinating is over the last 10 months or so, as those predictions have been pushed out into the mobile devices, it's mSupply Mobile is the interface that they're using. This is now available to them in those facilities to be actually accessing every month as they're saying, okay, these are all the different products that I need to be placing. And so we've been getting that real-time data back. About how they're accessing them, how their real orders compare to what we're suggesting is their forecast. And one of the things that has been fascinating is to see that we put the forecast in and say, here's how much is recommended that you think you need. And one of the things that happens all the time is that the health facilities are typically doubling or tripling that number, almost exactly. And so there's this, which we all know, right? That we all know that there's this gaming that has sort of existed. It's like a game theory of like they put in a higher number because they believe that the district warehouses are going to be undercutting them due to scarcity. So this has actually sort of gotten to the root of the next step of our partnership with the supply chain, the National Pharmaceutical Supply Agency, which is to say, how do we actually sort of break down that tension and say, rather than just putting out a forecast, why don't we help to say, here's actually what the recommendation is, knowing what the forecast is, and then knowing what the available supply is, and say, here's actually what is recommended to be sent. So that you don't have that sort of, consistent back and forth tension and gaming. And we can actually say, looking across the whole system, here's the amount that really should be issued from a district warehouse to the health facility, and starting to break down some of the gaming of that number. So it's been fascinating to see.
Fantastic. The next question is for the Viamo team. Viamo team. One of the things that we've seen is that airtime can be really expensive in many sub-Saharan Africa countries. So how are you thinking about the affordability of your solutions, knowing that your users may spend a lot of time on your platform listening and asking questions and learning more about some of the solutions and opportunities that are available to them in their communities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can take that one. So the Viamo platform now exists in about 24 countries. And in all of these countries, we've managed to negotiate preferential agreements with the mobile network operators. So in some countries, the Viamo platform is completely free. There's zero cost to the users. In other countries, it's free up to a point. There might be 8 or 10 free calls per month, after which they pay a very small, per call fee to continue accessing information. So what we're trying to create is ownership among the mobile network operators that this is a platform that they co-own as well. So they co-invest in because they see it as benefiting their bottom line, because the Viamo platform users are more loyal to the mobile network. They spend more money on the network. So it ends up being beneficial to them. So that's how we've managed to make the service free at the point of entry.
That's very interesting. And I love the creativity and how you've tried to subsidize the cost in ways that engage the telcos. I see a question in the chat window from Hardeen. As orgs focus on accelerating easier diagnostics in low resource settings, how are you also thinking about serving these communities with holistic and diagnostic to treatment models that connect them to affordable treatment options? I feel like almost any of our presenters might be able to address that one. Anyone want to raise their hand? Maybe I'm going to volunteer. Helen, would love to get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak. So I think this is a really interesting opportunity. And one of the things that we're thinking about is not just how AI tools are, providing decision support or assisting providers and making diagnoses, but also how are these tools making the providers experience better. So we know from, TIMSI Project and others, some of the limiting factors is not necessarily just access to technology, but it's also the number of children they need to see per day, or the amount of other resources available to them, or the frequency of their trainings, and how easy it is to access the latest information and doing their jobs. And so, we are looking at how these tools can do more than just diagnose, also enable providers to provide the best service that they can, also enable patients to have greater agency in their healthcare journey. So I think we all play a critical role in our own healthcare process, and having more information, having more access to credible information is a really key step for us all to sort of do more. And I think without speaking specifically to a project on this topic, connecting to care is absolutely part of that. So identifying where treatment's available and what the appropriate treatment is for your setting in your context are all pieces that I'm excited to read the latest research on and learn more from.
I can also chime in on this one quickly, if it's okay. So, as we've been thinking about this, so there's the accelerating easier diagnostics, and then also, getting people onto treatment. Those are the two pieces of this. Both of those are really market shaping opportunities, right? How do you understand how to get a new product in, to understand, how much demand there's likely to be, and then to be getting that into the facilities that could use it, whether that's a diagnostic or the treatment that could be so promising to follow up on. And this is something that we have been, really interested in as well, because if you don't have the product there, if it's stocked out, if you have been misforecasting or misallocating, then you don't actually get a good read of whether that diagnostic is likely to be used and helpful, whether that treatment can actually be, whether that would be preferred by the provider or by the patient. So how do you get the strongest possible market signal, and then also, be able to understand really how effective it is in communities? You have to make sure that it's in stock and on the shelves.
So Brittany, given you're in the hot seat, I'm going to direct this next question to you. It comes from Parul Goyal from BD. And it's, how are you thinking about cybersecurity in the context of increased adoption of AI and digital technologies?
Yeah, this is another question that came up in the chat also. We work with many governments, including the US government. So being able to set the highest level of security for our systems and our infrastructure is absolutely imperative. So we have achieved NIST compliance, which is the standard that's required by the US government. We've received government approvals from every government that requires them. For example, in Kenya now, many other countries are following. For example, Rwanda. Countries are setting up not only data security, but also where can data be housed. How can it be used? And making sure that our customers are comfortable with that, and that they know that we are legally required to be, keeping their data secure, is absolutely fundamental to us. As we are accessing their data, and being able to, particularly with things like personal health information, electronic medical records. These are the most important, most highly sensitive files, and so you have to make sure that that these are being well held.
If I could just add to what Brittany said, I mean, even in our space, which is very simple mobile phones, our experience is that, especially in Africa, a lot of countries are enacting data protection laws, and those have specific data residency requirements, even about data leaving the country, and, as Brittany said, personal identifiable information. So, even with very basic mobile phone technology, I think mobile network operators and regulators are now very conscious about the fact that even through basic mobile usage, there is a lot of abuse possible, and how to protect the consumer.
Shalukshana, stay here with me for the next question. It's directed to both Viamo and Pendulum, but we'll start with you. And it comes from Alice. Shifting gears for a minute, as small, medium enterprises in global health, where do you think more investment is needed to achieve your goals? What kind of funding has been most helpful to you? Is it grants, contracts, impact investment, a combination of them? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that's an ideal question for my colleague Stephen here, who is basically overseeing a lot of our strategic partnerships. Stephen, what are you saying?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. We the type of funding that's important for Viamo is we do receive grant funding from the Gates Foundation, but we're also launching a Series B at the moment and fundraising. So I guess that's maybe a bit of a call to anyone out there who might know venture capitalists who are interested in Viamo type of work. Please get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great plug. Pendulum, Brittany, anything?
Yeah, happy to chime in. So we are also venture funded. I actually think maybe one of our investors, Cross-Border Impact Ventures, is on the call. So thank you for being one of our investors. So that kind of investment is definitely necessary. But as I said before, we do work across different sectors. So global health, retail, fast-moving consumer goods, other government services. I would say, as the person who is most passionate, well, that's probably not fair, but the one who's thinking the most about global health within Pendulum, I think it is absolutely imperative that we show that there are contracts here, because otherwise, what will end up happening with any sort of a venture-backed company is that ultimately over time the market will be, you'll start to see your hockey stick, your J curve of growth with tech in other sectors. And we have to show that this is a sector that can be viable for deploying technology like this. So I feel really passionate about that. It can't just be like small innovation grants saying like, oh, let's try something. We have to really show that we're willing to deploy and measure it to find the ROI that can then be able to have your customers, whether that's the government or whether that's a network of pharmacies, wherever in those places, to have them be able to say, oh, I see that this makes complete sense because it helps me be so much more efficient. So how can we have those initial innovation kind of catalytic grants, M&E, to be able to show what the impact is, and then the ongoing contracts that are grounded in what that business value is that's been demonstrated.
Great point. And unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you to our audience for your fantastic questions. Thank you to our presenters for sharing their experiences with us. To close us out and to outline what's to come, I'd like to turn the mic over to Sarah Anderson, the Executive Director of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance. Sarah, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, I wanted to stay on mute to hear these wonderful presentations. Thank you so much to our speakers It was great, and I hope this got concrete for you all. It became more practical in global health, as well as giving you some of the wonderful examples of some of the challenges. With our conversations that we like to have with the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, we like to have candid conversations and get things that are really going to move the needle with insights and sharing. So we hope that you will join us in the future. In the chat, I had put in the survey. So we're asking folks, what are you doing in AI right now? What do you want to learn? How can we make these sessions better moving forward? So this is a quarterly series. This one was the first one. We'll have one probably at the end of April or early May. And then stay tuned to us by going to our website to find out a little bit more about us, about our members, other events, and stay tuned. And we certainly hope you will join us for the next one. So for those of you, I know we had a lot of people who were not our members on the call, and we're so glad that you could join us. Please reach out to me or our staff to find out more about the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, because we would love for you to be part of this cross-sector network of more than 85 organizations, from private sector to tech, et cetera, et cetera. So we love having everybody together to have these conversations, and we hope you will come back and join us again. So thank you, Natasha, and all of our speakers and all the staff that went behind this to make this happen. Thank you again.